can get rolling.
Hello and welcome to the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I am Joel A. Erickson. I'm joined as always by Nate Atkins. We are back in our hotel in Denver. The Colts basically need a miracle, or they need someone to more accurately, they need some collapsing to make the playoffs. This is where I'm going to start with this game before we get into the categories. We'll get into the categories shortly, but where I'm going to start with this game is just I did not like the Colts' chances in this game coming in. I didn't think they matched up well with them against Denver, but they did the things I didn't think they would do. Their defense was very, very good. We'll get into some of the numbers later, but the defense was great. Best game of the year by far. Bo Nix melted down. And then they ran the ball against the run defense. They had the most rushing yards Denver's given up all season long, which were the two things that I didn't think they were going to do. And they still lost this game by 18. Because and this is not limiting the gaffes, but there are two like all-timer gaffes in this game that we'll get to here in a little bit. But I'm just kind of flabbergasted by what happened.
Yeah, at risk of try not to totally step on some of our numbers of the day, but some of the overall numbers, just to put in perspective, just to sum up how crazy this game was. The leading receiver or rusher on the Broncos had 32 yards. They won by 18. They put up 31 points. Their leading rusher was Bo Nix, 8 carries for 23 yards. Their leading receiver was Cortland Sutton, 3 catches, 32 yards. I mean, until the very end when the Broncos just ran it enough to bleed some clock off and the Colts stopped running, Colts had about as many rushing yards as the Broncos had total yards, but they were down 18 at the same time. And it's crazy. It's crazy what the defense did to allow the fewest yards of the season, under 200, to get 3 interceptions. You combine that with, like you said, the run game. I mean, there's certainly they certainly were in danger of like a closer game, if not a loss, due to everything with the passing game as time went on. But one of those gaffes, as we'll get into, set it up to where it looked like all they were going to need to do was run the ball and then trust this defense that kept getting off the field or forcing Bo Nix interceptions to be able to close this out. And if they had closed it out, all of a sudden they'd be 7-7, staring down 3 incredibly winnable games, but also having the momentum of having gone on the road and beaten a good team like this and done the things that, like you said, we had a lot of serious doubts that they could do. That's a big confidence builder for a young team to do the things that it seems like they haven't been doing, or that, to validate some of those things against a team that takes those away all the time. It was all there for the taking. And this was just a crazy game that went from late third quarter feeling like a relatively perfect game for what you could have expected out of this team to basically turning into a nightmare. I think that has to be the only other quarter I can think of that felt as nightmarish as that. I mean, it would either be one of the ones from that Vikings collapse in 2022, or it was the Cowboys game that year, which was the worst fourth quarter in the history of football. But I still think in like the relative impact of it, like both of those were in a lost season. So they just added to the hilarity and craziness. And that team kept finding new ways to do crazy bad things. This was sort of like, this was right at the moment when a team is ready to ascend into being a wild card type team, and validating that in this game. And that's like everything just fell apart at the absolute worst moment, and all on the same side of the ball, basically. I mean, it wasn't like they had a little special teams issues in terms of defending returns that played into it. But for the most part, it wasn't like it was just like all the meltdown was concentrated to just one area of the team that just totally disintegrated. And I think it was, as we get into the gaps, we can kind of lay out why it went that way. I don't think it was completely coincidental, but I do think it tells us a lot about where this team and franchise are, even as it was just one quarter that undid it, basically. But I think it actually was was kind of revealing on certain things of where they are in the growth timeline of everything.
Well, let's get into the categories here, starting with the villain of the game. I mean, there's going to be two obvious ones. You'll pick one, I'll pick the other. I'll go with Jonathan Taylor. Historic mistake. There's no other way to put this. Like if you drop the ball before the goal line, you become one of like just a handful of guys in NFL history who've done that. Looking it up, there's Dick Smith in 1971 with the Steelers. Deshaun Jackson. You can throw Leon Lett in there if you want to throw celebrating too early, although he was punched out, he didn't drop it. This year there was Malachi Corley and Xavier Worthy. Before there was Taylor. Kyle Pitts did it last year. Sterling Sharp did it with the Packers, but then picked up the fumble and got in anyway because he did it kind of in the middle of the field. It just doesn't happen. And Jonathan Taylor was sort of at a loss to explain anything at the end of the game, which I think, like, if you think about making a mistake in your own life, like a really bad one, I don't think you always have an explanation for it. You kind of just feel shell-shocked. I felt like he kind of looked shell-shocked. He just kept saying, I do give him credit for saying this, it can't happen. It doesn't matter the scenario. It doesn't matter any of that stuff. It just can't happen. But yeah, it's villain of the game because after that, nothing went right for the Colts. Offense.
It's crazy because the margins in this league, if he holds that ball for one more step, he's the hero of the game. Like, he was the one guy on offense that was having a great game. I mean, he had finished with 22 carries for 107 yards, 4.9 a carry against run defense that, like you'd mentioned, they really don't give up anything to anybody. And he was out there making it happen. And that play was the best of them. That was the 40-yard gain, which was a credit to everybody. It was really well blocked, but it was his speed that just put him in a position where nobody could even come close to him, which is what made it so inexplicable for him to drop the ball. And I do think, like, he's going to have to process and figure out why that happened. I think that was part of why he wasn't explaining, is I don't think he really fully understands why would that happen. I mean, he scored so many touchdowns before, and I don't remember him dropping it like that close to the goal line. I mean, it just, to me, it was, this week we were, I was asking him and some others about like getting him trying to get back to that explosive runs. Like, he's, over the last, I think it was 4 games, he's not had a run of more than 14 yards until that run against the Broncos. And to bring it in that moment to like run 40 yards untouched to get it in the end zone, they were going to go up 20-7 on the road in Denver to pretty much stamp your place as a playoff team, as this newfound like identity of the team that they discovered kind of in New England when they just rode Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson to the point where they bet on it with a 2-point conversion and got it. Like, this was all coming together. And I just think there was like this excited release of him in the moment of getting that done. And I mean, it's just really unfortunate. It's like he said, it's not acceptable. It undoes everything. He was going to go from hero of the game to all of a sudden, I mean, he has to be the villain because there is no clearer turning point than that. The defense, which has been separate from all this stuff we're going to bring up, they got right off the field after that, but the offense was never the same. They never seemed to have the same trust. And that leads into my villain of the game. I'm going to tie A.D. Mitchell and Shane Steichen together on this for that double pass that ended up technically being a fumble, but was basically a pick six. A.D. Mitchell throwing back across to Anthony Richardson. Nick Bonito picks it off, goes 50 yards. And all of a sudden, a team that's down 17-14 or 17-13 is down 24-13. And it was essentially over at that point. Their offense was way too in a shell. They couldn't pass the ball to come back from 2 scores. Not to mention the momentum swing of doing that on the road. And it just was another kind of inexplicable situation. I mean, it's understandable. I know why it started that way. I mean, I know they dialed that up. They wanted to maybe get to it. Maybe they didn't think the situation presented itself earlier in the game. At that point, when they called it, their offense had gone in a hole where Taylor had that fumble. A couple series later, Michael Pittman Jr. had a fumble. That's your 2 horses of the offense that are now, in a rut and fumbling. It's like it became a desperate thing. Alec Pierce is hurt. I understand how Shane looked at this and realized, like, just thought he didn't have a lot he could lean on. But I just thought that was a step too desperate to run that play in that moment to A.D. Mitchell. And just looking back at it, the way they designed it, I didn't understand really how that was going to necessarily work unless the Broncos were just completely confused by it. It seemed to be relying on them messing up more than the execution of the actual play itself, because Anthony Richardson, so they're at the 40, I think like the 40-yard line, Denver's 40-yard line going in. So they only need 40 yards to get a touchdown. 17-13 game. There's 13 minutes left. They run. Anthony Richardson turns immediately right, throws back like a screen type action. And A.D. Mitchell's behind with 3 lined up receivers, one of which is Trey Sermon, and they're all blocking. So it looks like he's throwing a screen, but immediately A.D. Mitchell drops back. Now, maybe he didn't sell it the right way, but the second that he dropped back, but those 3 didn't go in any route, the defenders clued in that, like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, he wasn't going to throw to any of those guys. He wasn't looking to run behind them. So where's he going to go with the ball? And Nick Benito mentioned that I saw quotes from him after the game. He saw Anthony Richardson's just like standing there staring, waiting on A.D. Mitchell, like he was not really carrying anything out. And they realized they never throw screens to A.D. Mitchell. So they didn't think they were going to throw a screen to him in that moment. And then the second he stepped back, they knew he wasn't. So I didn't understand the design, and I just thought it was way too risky from Shane to put that on a player who has struggled to get the details and fundamentals of his own position at wide receiver this year, to have him nail all of those nuanced details at a different role of passing. And he ends up, he thought it was, AD said he thought it was open, threw it, and all of a sudden Nick Benito just, as he said, turned into Ed Reed to pick it off. Now, I do credit Nick Benito. It was a very athletic play to catch up to that ball, catch it in stride, but still, like he had his eyes on it the whole way. And there's got to be a way to read that. And if he is staying in there with them, you got to just run behind those blockers, throw it away. There had to be some situational awareness to, they could not turn it over right there, no matter what happened on that play. They had to not turn it over. And they did. And the way they turned it over ended up ending the game there. So, and then just didn't think A.D. Mitchell really owned it the proper way in the locker room. Afterward, when he just, like I said, he credited Nick Benito turning into Ed Reed, but he said, if you look from my point of view, I executed it right. I did what I was supposed to do. Again, like, I don't think Shane made a good gamble putting that on a 22-year-old in that situation, but players always have to find ways that they could have done better. And AD could have noticed Nick Benito sitting back there. He could have thrown it earlier. He was patting the ball, almost like trying to fake something down the field when there was no guys in the routes down the field. There just was not much situational awareness, I think, from coach or player in that moment. And it all combined for the play that ended, like, kind of sealed their fate in this game. And unfortunately, unless they get some help around the league, it might end up sealing their fate in the playoff race as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of the play is to just essentially set up a screen. They've got all the offensive linemen over there ready to go with Richardson. I'm with you, though. Like, if you're going to sell the throw down the field, you need something other than Kylan Granson down there. Yeah, I don't know. I would like to know more of why they thought that was going to work against the Broncos. That's not really Shane Steichen's MO. He just kind of says it was up. So they thought it was going to work. They wanted to get to it. It didn't. A.D. Mitchell also had 4 targets in this game that were terrible.
Mm-hmm.
He blew a deep ball that he had a shot at. He didn't block off a cornerback in breaking route. It's just kind of stuff we've seen from him all season. So,
yeah, that's fair to throw in there. I wasn't making about that play, but A.D. Mitchell's got to wear kind of the whole performance, because Alec Pierce went down on that. He suffered a brain injury on that deep pass. That's got, like, A.D. Mitchell, this has got to be your moment to step in and do some things. And not maybe he puts you in a tough spot, I guess, asking you to be a quarterback. But the other plays he didn't deliver either, and not even close. I mean, it's just like one of those passes in the end zone off his hands. And it's like, at some point this season, I know you're a rookie, but we're hearing the 14th game of the year. And if you're not able to step in for an injured player for a quarter and catch some of these passes, I mean, it's just not delivering on really the guy they banked on to elevate this passing game, the second round pick, the guy there's a lot of talk about how much potential he had, first round abilities. They were happy he fell to them in the draft. He was mad he fell in the draft, thought he should have been a first rounder. You can give some grace this season for, it's hard to be a rookie receiver at times. Certainly this passing game hasn't helped a lot of guys out, but the other three receivers in this offense have all found ways to produce and do things, even through some injuries. And this was 80 Mitchell's moment, and it went the opposite way from what they wanted.
Yeah. We'll slide over just because, like, if you look at our coverage today, there's not going to be a lot on the defense's good game, and with good reason. I mean, the stakes of this game meant that if they lost it, we were going to focus on that no matter what. Nate's eating shawarma, by the way, which makes him very Avengers-like. You guys, I'll let you guys decide which Avenger Nate is. I think in Deadpool and Wolverine, they also eat shawarma at the end. So,
okay, I can do some Wolverine. I'll lean into that.
So, but we're going to go to the hero of the game for a little bit. My hero of the game, I'm going to go with Nick Cross, just as the avatar for the back of the defense. The defense as a whole, we could give this to a lot of different people. But just Nick Cross, he had the big interception when they needed it, trying to flip the field. It didn't end up mattering because of Michael Pittman Jr., but just his presence around it, the fact that they couldn't get anything deep. Bo Nix kept trying to go deep, never really had anything. They've played Nick Cross more at strong safety for a long time because Julian Blackmon is dealing with a shoulder injury. But Cross really just kind of an avatar for just the whole secondary in general, because also you get the pick from Sam Womack and a couple of pass breakups. I know I gave a touchdown late, but oh well. And Kenny Moore had a really good game. And then Jalen Jones, they tried to pick on Jalen Jones. It didn't really work. So maybe I'll just make my hero of the game the secondary. The Colts secondary has been much maligned this year, but just a huge game when they needed it.
Yeah, I mean, like we said, when the leading receiver for the Broncos had 32 yards, you combine that with getting 3 picks on Bo Nix, and it wasn't like he only got hit one time. So really, it was like the Colts could have done more up front, I thought. But I mean, that's nitpicking a defensive performance that otherwise shut him down. But that plays into how good the secondary was. These were clean pockets on some of these picks that Bo Nix threw, and it was just coverage players ready for the moment all the way through. And so to combine with that, I'm going to give my hero of the game to Gus Bradley. We don't often do that on this podcast. He's, defense has had its struggles. He's at times been the villain, deservedly so. I thought this was just a really good game from the defense, and I think you have to go back to the coordinator who got a chance to go into the bye week coming off their worst performance in New England, just a terrible performance. And I talked about how this Broncos offense felt like it's like the better version of the Patriots. Young rookie quarterback coming into his own, mobile player, and they were building an offense throughout that was hard to force risk on. But this team did it, and they didn't do it just with guys dominating up front necessarily, but they were able to – I really liked how they mixed coverage up. They went man coverage early, but then they flipped it to zone. I think that confused Bo Nix as far as what he thought he was going to get pre-snap versus post-snap, and he ends up forcing the ball in. That's how Nick Cross got his interception. I know they just really had him figured out and had a pretty good plan for when he scrambled. He got one early in the game when they were in man coverage. A nice scramble, I think, went for like 16 yards. But again, the rest of the game, he had 7 yards. I think that's when they went to some zone and they were able to take that away, force him to step back in the pocket and throw, and they were able to pick passes off. So outside of there was like a one drive where the tight ends got going, and a player named Nate Atkins got a touchdown like I had foreshadowed for no other reason than his name. In the last podcast. But outside of that one drive, really, that was the only drive I really thought, and even that, it shouldn't even say a drive. It was sort of a period in the game, but that scoring drive was a 15-yard drive after that, a crazy punt return. And then the one score at the end was just Cortland Sutton. That was like the dam breaking. So much. the offense with so many possessions in a row. This is bonus number of the day because I'm saving a different one for that. But Colts' last 9 possessions in a row did not score. It was a fair mix of punt, fumble, turnover on downs, and pick. Like every way you can get off the field other than the way you want is what they did. So the defense, eventually the dam just kind of broke underneath that. But in the course of the game where it felt like this game was in balance, defense delivered time and again. I think you have to credit the defensive coordinator coming out of a bye week, fixing a lot of these issues and making life tough on the rookie quarterback.
Yeah, that's a good one. Gus Bradley's a good one. Unsung villain of the game, I'm going to go Anthony Richardson here. It's just he's got to be better as a passer. He just does. Way too many misses. I think your unsung villain of the game will probably get into some of the stuff around him. There's drops, there's other stuff, whatever. But there's other quarterbacks have drops, other quarterbacks have this other stuff. They got to get. They had every reason to have the passing game working today. The running game was working like Denver never does. Riley Moss wasn't there for the Broncos. This is the same defense that just gave up 497 yards or something like that to Jameis Winston. They had 2 explosive throws all day. And both of them were the kind of mini explosive throws where it's just barely 20 yards, And he missed a lot. He missed a lot of throws. He just did. I think there's a lot of stuff to like about him going forward. People are going to take this and be like, well, you're out on him entirely. That's just the way we talk about Richardson. I don't think so. I think that he's proven that there's a reason to keep looking at him going forward. But, man, the passing has to get better at some point. Maybe it's next year. But the passing has to get closer to an NFL level of efficiency. It just does. Otherwise, this offense has no chance.
Yeah, there wasn't a good reason for why the passing game wasn't better, other than the fact that they just failed to deliver, and most of that was the quarterback. It was a weird one though because I thought he was pretty good to start the game. He started 2 of 2, and a couple of those throws on third down, they thread the needle. Michael Pittman, thread the needle. Josh Downs. Those are the ways that he's been throwing since the benching that had shown progress, that had shown kind of throwing with anticipation and ball placement, kind of knowing where certain defenders were going to be. And I thought that would get him into more of a rhythm, especially when he was also running well. Had a nice scramble in there and then ran that 23 yards around the end for a touchdown. So the rushing, when usually the formula is when he gets involved well, in a nice way as a rusher, kind of helps him feel involved. He gets confident in a flow, but then for him to pass well early on and then fall apart, that was tough to see. You got to credit the Broncos defense, who is really good. And I know obviously they could be had against Jameis Winston, but they also have that pass rush that played into it. Anthony Richardson, it's a weird thing because the flashes you like are his crazy ability to avoid sacks, but they're not turning into successful plays the way they need to. If you're able to avoid sacks, get a defender who got deployed in the pass rush on the ground out of the play, but extend the play, keep those guys in coverage, that should be advantage offense, and it just doesn't turn out that way enough right now. So this was a step back from 3 games where I thought he really was making some good strides. So it just shows you how up in the air everything still kind of is with this kid. And so my unsung villain, I'm going to go with the Colts offensive line for this one.
That's where I thought you were headed.
Because, it was another different sort of combination. I guess that was the thing. We thought it was going to be different. And then it ended up being the same one they used in New England because Braden Smith is now, he's on the non-football injury list. So I'm thinking we'll see him again this season. And, so that happened. But then they decided, they downgraded Ryan Kelly, but then they decided to go with Danny Pincher over Tanner Bortolini to keep the same group that they had in New England. The idea was to carry it forward. That group did well, pass pro that game. Did not happen this game. Pass pro really fell off this game. I think that goes to show how much better the Broncos pass rush is than the Patriots. They're number 1 in sacks for a reason, but they really had their way up front. Only ended up getting 2 sacks on Anthony Richardson, but 10 quarterback hits. He was just really under duress all day. And it's just, I felt like I don't think that move to Danny Pinter over Tanner Bortolini paid off the way they wanted to. It felt like the runs up the middle with Jonathan Taylor were the weakest that they did. And they did run pretty well, overall. But again, like so much of that was baked on 2 runs for 63 yards by Taylor and Richardson to the edge. Credit the O-line, for those plays. But overall, I don't think that they had a strong day. And then the penalties, I mean, those really added up too. There was one point where Danny Pinter had like 3 penalties and just a couple of drives. That just fed into – it was right in that period of the game where they had to settle down after Taylor fumbled at the goal line. And the O-line, those guys, they're the ones you want to settle down with the run game and with, base plays. And when they're out there committing penalties, it just really, really fed into the rattled young passing game. And so the offensive line's going through some stuff that's just unfortunate. Obviously, Braden Smith being out, chief among them. But I thought they had enough today to play pretty well when you've got Mark Lewinsky's now seems like your clear best option at right guard. Bernard Ryman, who's back at left tackle. Those settings have made things always easier on Quentin Nelson. They had their choice of 2 centers. Some people would argue their best 2 centers. We'll see what Ryan Kelly can do when he comes back. I thought they had enough to at least kind of have a decent game against a very tough front, but they kind of got handled today.
Yeah, and I thought the pressure was the biggest thing with Richardson. He's so good at avoiding sacks, but the problem is, and we talked about this a little bit on the way here, but like when he avoids the sack, it doesn't turn into a play. It turns into an incompletion. So like they avoid the negative yardage, but they get no yardage, and a lost down essentially. So they've got to be better at protecting him, giving him more time. Luckily for them, they play some teams in disarray, although the Titans might still be okay on defense. Unsung hero of the game for me is Zaire Franklin. 9 tackles, 2 for loss, an interception. I thought he made a lot of plays near the line of scrimmage. The Broncos only had 72 rushing yards. There was the play to Atkins. Franklin was in coverage on that. I don't know if he was involved in the Troutman play, but I've covered Sean Payton enough to know that he's gonna scheme up some stuff. And I think Franklin, for the most part, played pretty well today.
Yeah, he had 2 tackles for loss too. So kind of outside of giving up that touchdown to my namesake, which I can't hold that against anybody too much. I thought he had a nice day. We've covered most of these guys on defense, one way or another, between the secondary and defense coordinator and Franklin. So I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to actually go with Anthony Gould, just unsung hero. It's just he's important as in terms of importance and how the game will go down. It's not up there with these other guys, but I want to give him a little bit of shine for a guy that basically he lost his job and was forgotten about for like 2/3 of a season. Came back this game as a return man. I was curious how much of that was Josh Downs feeling effects from the shoulder injury, them trying to keep him together a little bit more with how important he is, versus the strides Anthony Gould has shown them in practice in terms of the stuff they wanted to see, which was aggressive returns and good decisions on returns. And I thought he really did well with that. I mean, he every time that he touched back, it made sense. And then he, was able to take 2 returns out. One of them didn't go for anything, but the other one was really, really impressive. Punt return where he was able to sidestep the gunner, kind of run inward to influence, get the coverage moving inward, stepped outward, made 2 guys miss shoestring tackles and ends up, returning it for 36 yards. And that got them a field goal at the end of the first half. And so that got them, that was important at that moment in a game that the points were hard to come by for a lot of this game until it should have been all game, if not for the Colts offense just imploding down the stretch. But that was a way for them to get in position to kind of be able to break this game open for 2 scores. And so that was not something I saw coming when we were prepping for this game. Didn't know that we'd be talking about Anthony Gould, but I thought he, for the first time this season, showed, at least on one return and some of his sound decisions on the other returns, like that's what they saw in him out of Oregon State, was a guy who could be a high-end punt returner.
Let's go to number of the day. We've got some of these keyed up. I'm going to start with mine. My number of the day, 3.6. The Colts lost a game when their opponent averaged 3.6 yards per pass attempt and 3.2 yards bonus number of the day overall. I got nothing more than that. Like, they're not even averaging a first down every 3 plays, which is like the bare minimum for NFL play.
Yeah. This is NFL play in 2024.
And they lost by 18.
I know. You'd think you'd describe a team that – so it's so weird. You read these stats, you think we're describing the opposite. Like the Colts won this game 31-13. And that's how the box score would look for Denver. and here we are in the reverse. So that's a good one. My number of the day is 47, which is the number of receiving yards for Kylan Granson, which made him the second leading receiver on the Colts today, behind only Michael Pittman Jr. I say this for 2 reasons. Number one, it's props to Granson. Better game for him. Took a nice screenplay. Didn't have the drops issues. 47 yards, like usually when the whole tight end group combines for that, that's one of their best days. He carried the group for the tight ends. So for today, the tight ends weren't like a problem, but that number is still the problem because in this offense, Kylan Granson should not be number 2 in receiving yards. It just kind of showed you the struggles they had to get Josh Downs going at all. He only had 3 catches for 32 yards, bad miscommunication. Couldn't get Alec Pierce going when he was in the game at all, and then he ends up getting hurt on one of those plays. Obviously, we went through the stuff with A.D. Mitchell. Just so much failed around this group to where if those guys came through and Kylan Granson had 47 yards, I mean, it probably doesn't all work out that way, but I mean, if we're sitting here and say he delivered and did his job well, this should have been a good passing game when you got that out of a tight end when they usually get nothing. And the fact that they had such a bad passing day, I think just sums up just how much everybody else struggled.
Yeah, they've had a lot of games where they don't get 47 yards from the tight ends.
Yeah, that's got to be one of the tops of the season.
Now we get into the fun stuff. We've been pretty down, so let's get into the fun stuff. We'll start with game day observation. What's your game day observation? Because I'm ready to go on mine.
I hope I'm not stealing yours. I think I may be in risk of it. So I'm going to let you go first because I'll feel bad.
The Colts should have a live horse.
Yes, that's what I thought you were going to do.
The Colts should have a live horse. I think this every time we come to Denver, they trot Thunder up and down the field all the time. He goes out and scores. Why don't the Colts have a live horse? People are like, well, what about Blue? Broncos have some random stuffed animal. Like, you can have both. Why can't you have both? Someone in the press box suggested that Blue ride in on the horse.
I guess my only question would be, is there anything about the indoor setting and the turf at Lucas Oil that makes it hard to get a horse in there?
I don't know. I'm not a horse person. But they should have a horse. They should have a live horse.
They got the tunnel from outside the stadium in there. I think they just ride in that white horse. But I don't know.
Also, somebody else suggested that they just get a miniature horse. Lil Sebastian from Parks and Rec. Hell yeah, let's do that. Live horse.
That would make so much sense to get a Lil Sebastian, especially with all the Indianapolis ties in that entire show. Like, you're a colt, you're a tiny horse. I mean, it's all kind of set up. So it makes a lot of sense. To pivot from that, I'm going to go with the halftime show. It was very fun today. It was, I forget the actual terminology they used for it.
Mutton busted.
Yes. They had little kids riding on sheep.
Yep.
And it was like and I don't mean like really like sheep walking. It was like sheep sprinting full out and seeing if the kids.
It's bull riding. It's basically bull riding.
Bull riding for these kids who are like, what, 5 to 7 years old or something like that. They have like helmets on, so it's not like they're getting hurt. But they're a lot of the times they're just flying off these sheep. It's like it was very hard for them to hold on to them. But they seemed game for it. They didn't seem like they knew they signed up for, or probably their parents signed up for it. But they seemed to be enjoying it. And then to see that dog run out there just chasing them around was fun. And that might have been the dog we passed as we were walking out of the stadium. He was still pretty fired up. That Aussie reminds me very much of my Aussie Grady, who's made the occasional cameo on here. So just seeing an Aussie out there chasing sheep, that was.
I was going to say, in the press box, you could tell who grew up in the country and who didn't, because those of you who were really freaking out about the mutton busting did not grow up on a farm like some of us. Not that there were sheep on the farm, but I'm aware of mutton busting. Also very aware of our neighbor had a dog who rounded up like 1,000 cows. It was awesome.
Yeah. If my dog ever knew that that's what Aussies are used for, he would be very mad at me for not living on a farm and having him do that.
3 football things that gave me joy, 3 football things that left Nate terribly vexed. This is going to be super easy for Nate. In fact, I'm going to let you start.
Oh, where do I begin? With the risk of piling on to a guy who very much owned his vexing moment, and he's vexed by it, it is the ball dropping at the 1 yard at the goal line, because I don't think Taylor has any idea why it happened either. It's so it's vexed. It's one thing to be vexed, for us to be vexed, and then the player is still completely vexed by it. But I'm trying to expand it a little bit beyond him. I know it's very rare for this to actually play out this way at the NFL level, but I feel like this does happen college level more. At least there's borderline. They'll review it, and they often find out that he didn't. But it's like the fact that it's even reviewable. Today the Bengals had one of those where they lost a touchdown on a defensive touchdown. Now they ended up rolling the Titans, so it won't get anywhere near the play. And also it was a defensive player. But I'm just vexed by that even being something that happens at all. I mean, I remember a couple of these I've seen throughout the years. It's been part of like a very vibrant celebration. You're like throwing the ball in the air, which doesn't make it any better, but at least I can kind of understand like you were literally celebrating early. I've just seen too many of these where like the ball, I don't know what makes the ball drop at that moment. And I don't think they understand it either. So it's like one of those things that's so vexing that the player who's doing it is so vexed. And that was the reaction I felt from Taylor. He was upset about it, very upset about it, knew it was unacceptable, but I think he was legit confused as to why it happened too, which is all the more baffling that went down.
Yeah, number one football thing that gave me joy, the little sprint pitch, sugar, I'm not sure what to call it, the little quick pitch to Jonathan Taylor on 3rd and long. But early on in the game, Shane Steichen used his tendencies against himself a little bit to get some first downs with the running game. And I like that one better than the draw. The draw is kind of like the standard one. I like with a little wrinkle to get him to the edge for the first down.
Yeah, that was a cool play design. It was like when they would go away from those runs up the middle, it got interesting. So, I mean, I'm sure that was part of the plan, was to suck the attention inward and go back outward at times. Second football thing that left me terribly vexed, to get back a little bit more into that play from A.D. Mitchell to kind of split the gaffes among these vexings. The motion of Trey Sermon out to wide receiver, I guess if they would run a screen, I guess there's some logic in that because he's your pass protecting back. But I think the moment that they did that was the tip that this was something very weird happening. That like it just Trey Sermon's role. I mean, for a long time, I remember that stat coming into the game. I'd shared. I'd see if this has changed at all. Oh, Trey Sermon got a carry today, so it's something a little bit. But like coming into the game over the past 6 weeks, Taylor had was 114 to 116 running back handoffs for this team. So you were like almost never using Trey Sermon unless it was just a clear pass pro thing. So to motion him out there, I think that was the tip. And it's just one of those like when you're asking players to come kind of bring this back, when you're asking players to do things that you never ever do, it doesn't mean that you're not trying something that is what it looks like a screen, but also that ends up being the biggest indicator for a coach who has like trick plays in his history that something fishy and weird is going on. So maybe like just don't, if you're going to be tricky, like maybe just don't scream to everybody, hey, this makes no sense. Like right as the play happens and hopes they fall for it. So I thought that part of it was a little bit weird.
Number two football thing that gave me joy, punt returns. I don't really want to say the Marvin Mims ones because this is Colts podcast, but Anthony Gould's punt return, aggressiveness, picking his way through. Love a good punt return. Honestly, love a good kick return. We just haven't gotten many of those. Need the NFL to change the rules a little bit to make it easier. But love returns. If you've listened to this podcast long enough, you know I really like special teams. So that's the second football thing that gave me joy.
That's true. They were fun. It was and Anthony Gould that's why he got my unsung hero. That was the punt return of the season so far. So unfortunately, game was so weird it got lost and all of that. Third football thing that left me vexed. I just had it. I'm just gonna go with this is kind of bland, but I'm very perplexed when we have a game where they can't get Josh Downs the ball because that has felt so automatic. And I understand occasionally they're going to go up against, a superstar nickel corner that makes that hard. It just today felt like something was very disconnected with it. There was one play where clear miscommunication where they just didn't it wasn't anywhere near where Anthony was throwing the ball to. And there was another play that just flat out Anthony just sailed it over his head. So that's got nothing to do with Josh, but it just felt like they moved his role around more than they necessarily needed to. I thought they got a little cute with that, where he was playing outside a little bit more, and then that was where he was on that play where they had the miscommunication. They said that they were doubling him. I think sometimes they were moving him to some they weren't using him in the orbit motion, pre-snap motion as much to give him free releases. I don't know. It just seemed like it's weird when you have something that's working as well as it is, and then kind of pivot off that a little bit. And some of it, execution was certainly, it kind of goes back to all of them, how, Anthony Richardson lost the connection with him. Maybe Josh lost something. Maybe he was on the wrong end of that miscommunication. I mean, it was one first game back from the shoulder, but he practiced all week. Just, I don't know. I'm just vexed when you have it shows he's human, but a player who seems so consistent, suddenly it's you can't really dial up anything for him. And they tried it on that fourth down play, and that wasn't open either.
Number 3 football thing that gave me joy, Kenny Moore all day. Just really, really good. When a little guy is mixing it up the way he does and getting off blocks and creating big plays. He only had 2 tackles, but he made way more plays than that with his physicality. And just, Kenny's not a very big guy. He plays like he weighs about 230 pounds. It's really fun to watch.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to the sort of heavier categories. Too little blame, too much blame. The Colts lost. It's a blame week. I'm going to start with too little blame. Too little blame for me, Ashton Doolin's ankle injury. Tyler Goodson has had some nice moments as a gunner. He is not anywhere in the stratosphere of Ashton Doolin, who's one of the better gunners in the league. They badly needed it today. The ball is going to carry a little bit more on Rigo Sanchez in Denver. Goodson, frankly, couldn't get through the vise, and Marvin Mims had 3 big punt returns because of it. So Goodson is at fault a little bit for that, but it's also really hard to have more than one elite gunner, and the Broncos took advantage of Ashton Doolin having an ankle injury.
It's a good one. I mean, my gosh, is that noticeable? They go from the best punting team into some of those were disastrous. I mean, it was Marvin Mims.
They gave up a 61-yarder.
Yeah.
They lost the lead essentially because Marvin Mims got the big punt return.
He got 97 yards on 3 punt returns, and that is incredible when you compare it to they had 193 yards total in the game. So it was they had half as many of that just returning punts. So that's how you survive that kind of offensive day. Too little blame for this game. I feel like a lot of this has been pretty appropriate. I guess I'll go, since we haven't brought him up yet, Michael Pittman Jr. for the fumble. Really bad play in that moment. So, it's compounded. It's you're both of your star cornerstone offensive players, the guys who are not the young new kids on the block, the ones you paid, both had a fumble in critical time when you've got a lead in a game, trying to close out, trying to get to the playoffs for the first time since those guys were both rookies. They've got to lead the charge, and we've blamed Taylor a lot for his, and deservedly so. Pittman deserves some too, and he took that blame after the game, just said that he saw the defender, but the defender, he just timed it up well, helmet right on the ball, and he was too concerned with trying to make a play after the catch than just securing the ball and making sure that was the most important thing when the hit was coming, and just came at a really horrible time because as bad as the drop was from Taylor, the score was still the same at that point. They got off the field 3 and
Cross
out.
had a pick. Cross had a pick right before that.
Yeah, and then Cross had the pick. So like their offense is dead, but Cross just got the pick. It's time to go back out there. They hit Pittman. Not a lot of passing plays worked. That one looked like it was working. And then he fumbles right at a part in the field that just I think they stopped him again. If I look here, I think that was right after the Broncos. Yeah, the Broncos I think got a field goal right after that, if I remember. That's how that went. Yeah. So they only gave up a field goal to make it 13-10. But still, I mean, that made it so that the next drive out, that next score, ended up taking the lead. And if not for that exchange, maybe it's a tie game when they all of a sudden go to that double pass. Maybe it all plays out the same way. But it was just like all these things compounded. And I think the fumble from Pittman's easy to lose it because it wasn't quite as like, hey, I've never seen that before, and I can directly tie it to these points that were this touchdown that did or didn't happen. But it all played in the middle of that and turned this thing into a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, pretty big mistake. Too much blame. Who's getting too much blame for this game? This is a tough category.
It is. Is it weird if I say Jonathan Taylor?
Let's hear it out.
I don't know. This is a stretch, but I'm just going to say that, like, I don't think the Colts are even in the game if it not for him. They really had nothing on this entire offense that wasn't Taylor. So it's almost like his success set up the biggest gaffe, which is why he deserves all the blame in the world for that play, and that's going to overshadow it. So it's like I'm totally talking on both sides of my mouth, but I just think that, like, put any other running back in this spot. I mean, we've seen it all season. If he was out, put Trey Sermon and Tyler Goodson in. They probably don't ever have a chance to take a lead. And certainly that feels futile when they lose like they do. But again, like Taylor, the way they responded to the fumble, which again, he started it. So that's on him to a point. But it just felt like this team wasn't built. The guys around him weren't built to really overcome anything, achieve anything today. So like when they stopped, that kind of led them away from Taylor, and everybody else got exposed for being just really not ready. Pittman fumbles. A.D. Mitchell throws essentially a pick six. Anthony Richardson doesn't get anything else going, threw a pick in there as well. Alec Pierce never produced. Like, his team's got Taylor deserves tons of blame for that play, but I also think they may have gotten shut out if he doesn't play today. And so I don't know. It's just like one of those, like, you give him a lot of blame, but also I think it's at least fair to recognize, like, this is still a star player, and like him having that one mistake is like they couldn't overcome it because they don't have anything else on offense at the moment.
That one. Please direct all emails to Nate Atkins. That was Nate Atkins giving that one.
No, I tried my best, and I'm curious how you come up with one because it was very hard to come up with one.
Too much blame is really tough in this game.
Yeah.
Is anyone getting blamed in the defense? I'll say Samuel Womack for giving up that touchdown late. Just to pick someone for the category. I don't have anything else. He was really good otherwise. I don't have anything else. I can't think of anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, at least feeds into, like I said, like the dam was going to break at a certain point. I mean, maybe he should still have a little tighter coverage on that. But also, are you really going to ask Samuel Womack to just be perfect the entire game when no, it's so. I don't know.
Quentin Nelson?
Anything else?
Quentin Nelson, because I don't remember him being involved in any bad plays.
Which means he's probably not getting blamed. But
yeah, so yeah, we'll just stick with Sam Womack. I don't really have anything else. That leaves us with one to throw away and one to go on. We always start with one to throw away. what's one thing we're talking about now that we're not going to be talking about the last couple of weeks of the season and into the there's a really cheeky answer for this. I feel like I'm setting you up for a joke.
Oh, I was just going to say the playoffs.
That's what I thought you were going.
Okay.
Yep.
Throw the conversation away. To me, like if that implosion track that they need to have happen from the Chargers begins to happen, and we're going into the last week and they're still within it, we can talk about it then. But I don't think anybody's going to be in that conversation mode. The players have to be to a point. So they'll say that stuff, and we'll probably print a quote or two from them that say that stuff. I don't think that's where fans will be thinking, and certainly not getting excited about it. Not only that, but today actually kind of encapsulated to me why this team is not ready for the playoffs, is like closing out a game like that. And when things get a little hectic and you're in a loud road environment, which is what would await them in the playoffs, who's going to settle you down? Who's going to make the plays that like get this back on track? And today the answer was that they didn't have that, at least on offense. They had the opposite of that. So it's a totally different thing. If they had held on to win, no matter how, if they'd won by 1 point, the most, block a field goal, win by one, however it went down, they were going to be in the driver's seat to make the playoffs. And at least they can say they beat a team that's playoff caliber. They have one win this season over a team that's in the playoff discussion. That's the Steelers. This was their chance to stamp that and end up finding a way to lose by 18. So playoff conversation, even if they're mathematically not eliminated yet, I just don't think it's a conversation in reality until, like I said, maybe if we're going into the final game and some of this other stuff has happened to where it's a possibility. And look, it'd be fun to cover. I've covered one playoff game across 3 teams in like 9 years. So this has not been going the way that I thought it would. But for right now, playoff conversation is not super relevant.
Big reminder that Nate is the problem. It's Nate.
It is.
My one to throw away, the defense isn't going to play this well the rest of the season. Like they're not going to give up. They're not going to look like world beaters the rest of the season. There's going to be some inexplicable game in here where one of these 3 terrible teams they play down the stretch gets a bunch of yards, because that's just the way this defense has been for 3 years.
Yeah, this was their A game, which is just unfortunate to say based on the way that went down. You thought for sure they would win if they got their defense's A game.
That leaves us with one to go on. One thing we're going to be talking about now that we're going to be talking about the rest of the season and on into the season. I'll start with mine. The whole discussion on Anthony Richardson is going to be kind of in this, will he ever reach this potential for the all off season? We've gone past the point where you feel like in the last 3 games, and even if they did make a playoff game, which again, I'm with you, they're in miracle range. They need a miracle. And I don't say that unless it probably won't happen, because it's a miracle. That's what miracle means. I had a few people online last week who were like, well, those teams aren't going to lose out, so it doesn't count. And I was trying to explain to them that I can't say they've been eliminated from the playoffs until they've actually been eliminated from the playoffs, because it's misleading. But it didn't seem like people were getting that. So I don't think they're making the playoffs. They need a miracle. They need stuff to happen, that they need a combination of things to happen that's just not going to happen. So it's probably just 3 games. And what we've seen from him as a passer so far, it doesn't lead you to think that he's for sure the franchise quarterback. I think we've also seen enough good stuff from him to think maybe we'll give him one more year, since he's kind of got a full year starting under his belt, to see if he can turn it around. But we're not going to know. We're not going to know for sure whether or not he can be the franchise quarterback by the end of the season. We're just not.
No, because even if he had 3 like really good performances, it's sort of like it just makes it sort of the roller coaster. It just completes a roller coaster. It was also incomplete because he missed 2 games to injury, missed 2 games to a benching. We're still dealing with short sample sizes, and that's again in the best case scenario. The reality is that he's in very erratic passer, and he's going to need off-season work to do that. And you go back to like the Josh Allen model, he talked about off seasons were what he really needed to like take one season and then kind of grow from. It wasn't like it was just happening week to week within the season. So we do need more time to see on that. My one to go on is that I think Shane Steichen right now is shown to be he's kind of cemented himself as a plays over players coach. And I think that's going to continue because I think when you're in that mindset and you've stayed in that mindset for, this is a large enough sample now for him. So he's coached, how many games has it been? 31 games as a head coach. And it's been 14 games since this conversation kind of reared up with the 4th and 1 against the Texans last year. I've covered a few, these coaches who rise from coordinator to head coach, and this is a battle that they have to kind of adjust to. You got to a certain job because the play designs were really successful. They love what you do there, but at some point you need to kind of tailor that to your team a little bit better. And become about players rather than plays. And I just think he keeps, when things are most dire, he goes to the play sheet over the players. Again, today you can excuse some of that because the players also screwed up when Michael Pittman fumbled, when Jonathan Taylor dropped the ball at the end zone. But it's more the rationale that we're getting after some of these plays where when he calls a creative play like to A.D. Mitchell, and the explanation is basically, it's either A.D. Mitchell should have done this. There's a little bit of that, like, hey, if it was covered, should have thrown it away. And then there's also credit Nick Bonito for a great play. And then if it works, it's like it empowers that idea of like the look of the play design was so great. It's a very hard to get out of that mindset, which I kind of look at as a play caller fallacy, to ever getting to the point of fixing that desire to go to those tricky plays in their do or die moments when there's no margin for error. And I just think he's kind of doubled down on the decisions he made on that 4th and 1 last year against the Texans. He's doing it again this year at every dire moment. This is kind of who he's shown to be right now. And I just think when the place he's in, where that's the kind of reflection of just, well, that's what we called up. The defense showed this. And if it doesn't work out, it's because the defense made a great play. I don't know how you get out of that until maybe you have to, it's hard when you're at the top of the food chain and you're living in that mindset. So I think the one to go on is he's a plays over players coach. If they can get back to the plays working a little bit more like they did last year, then it can work out. But I think it's what I kind of wrote about for tomorrow is it's created a disconnect with a team that has some good players, but like its depth spots are really lacking. They're either really young like A.D. Mitchell or they're like backups like these tight ends and these backup running backs who really should not be playing. And when those are the guys that a defense is leaving unaccounted for, you're always going to be in that mindset of like, well, the execution could have been better or the defense made a better play. I think this is the space we're in with Shane Steichen, and I think we're going to be here until, I don't know, something changes. Either more success happens with the plays or maybe something finally happens, a deep conversation to get him out of it.
To play the devil's advocate, do you think of Andy Reid as a plays over players coach? Because I do.
No, because I think he starts with the players, and the plays are about those players accentuating them. So the players are about the strengths of Patrick Mahomes or the strengths of Tyreek Hill, the strengths of.
I mean, they had a Super Bowl. They had a Super Bowl where Kadarius Toney was the star.
Yeah, I mean, in conjunction with Patrick Mahomes, but like. I think if you look at him, the guys leading the Chiefs to victories are always their best players, almost always. So
I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of random calls with him where there's like some dude ends up being, a Kadarius Toney or some other guy that they picked up. Mecole Hardman makes a play or something.
Yeah. I mean, it's a balance. I mean, I think all good coaches have a little of both. You got to be a little bit of both. But I just think you're not going to see like Andy Reid have a whole quarter of a Super Bowl where Travis Kelce's healthy and he doesn't play. But we might see that here. So it's just part of the evolution. I don't know. Shane's a great play designer, and it's tough. Today's not the best example for it because, like I said, the players didn't deliver either. But I just think consistently we've seen this where we start with the plays and I figure out what players do I want to fit to that. When I like the reverse mindset, I think is Andy Reid and a lot of other coaches like that. They're coming up with what plays can I get to take this person to the next level? Like Kyle Shanahan does that with Deebo Samuel to take him to like an MVP level rather than like even when that's what the defense is accounting for. Just like get him the ball even more, kind of force feed. So
okay. I was just curious what you thought about
but yeah,
that.
no, it's fair to say that like they're great coaches are both. I mean, it's not like you're only gonna like at some point you have to use the attention a player gets to create something for someone else. That's good coaching too. So I don't know. It's all nuance. It's all just a talking point as we try to sift through all this.
Well, I mean, the larger point you're trying to get at is Shane Steichen good at his job? Like, does he have any value to the Colts at all? Because he's an offensive play caller, and if he can't do that well, it's really bad.
Yeah, I mean I guess that kind of gets at it, is that like he has one very specific method of coaching, which is the offensive play design, and frankly, that's where like last year I thought he was a star, and I think this year I don't know that anyone's regressed more last year to this year than Shane. Maybe that was natural because last year was like such a burst on the scene that there's a little bit of adjustment to the league's going to have to you, but that's what I think has to get a little bit more on track for like if Anthony Richardson's going to work, which is already it's still like a unlikely proposition, like he's more likely to bust than not. That was just what he is. It's going to have to come in conjunction with like getting the best out of Shane in that same area. I think we saw it last year mostly without Anthony. Don't think we saw it this year. So they got to get back to that for both of them. Both of them are going to have to lift each other up to make this work.
I think of it as like there is definitely some stuff that's concerning. Like it concerns me that they can't run the ball without Richardson.
Yeah.
That's a concern to me because I've seen somebody else do it, you know. There's the passing game is really, really difficult for me to evaluate because of some of Anthony's tendencies. Like I don't know what he's passing up to look for other stuff. Like today, he said that the pick he threw to Pierce, he should have handed the ball off. Which makes me wonder about some of the other plays. It's kind of like Bo Nix. There was a play with Bo Nix today where Bo Nix passed up a wide open running back to throw an interception and it crossed. Great decision, Bo. So some of the passing game stuff is harder to figure out from a play calling thing. I'm going to be honest. I don't think anybody has a good handle on trying to guess like passing game play calling stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's reads involved and we don't know what the reads are and all that stuff. Like the only reason that I know that Nix probably should have thrown to that running back is that I covered Peyton for 3 years and I watched Breeze hit that running back over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's definitely stuff to be concerned with Shane. And like you said, there's also stuff to be concerned with Chris Ballard. Today, when Jonathan Taylor had 11 carries in the first half, or in the first quarter, and they finally give a carry to Sermon because they have to. It's like, wouldn't it be better if there was somebody who would make it 8 carries for Jonathan Taylor?
Well, and it's good that you connected that to it because that's the fair way to get it. This plays versus players thing is that with Andy Reid, when he does kind of go off script, I'm going to use your attention on Travis Kelce to set up another player. That other player is better than the ones the Colts have because their front office is better at getting, like they put more attention into getting those type of guys, I think, than they do here. It's like this style of, I do think Shane is a plays over players coach, but that could work better if some of the players who are like being forgotten were just better. Like if the tight ends who aren't getting the attention of Michael Pittman Jr. and Jonathan Taylor were good tight ends, if the running backs who were catching passes only were good, I mean, like the plays would work better if the players were better. It's like that's just sort of the disconnect. Is it's like it's a front office that really makes it about we're gonna roll back our specific few cornerstone guys, and everyone else is just gonna have to come from the draft, and we'll see how they are. That doesn't jive well with a coach who's like, hey, I'm gonna set up plays for the guys the defense leaves open. The defense is leaving them open because they're not all that good, and so that's kind of the rut. Is we're too often talking about the Colts lose a game, and we're talking about somebody who's in a spot that they're just not really either experienced enough for, talented enough for. Today, A.D. Mitchell was that player, which is just an experience kind of dialed in thing and also being involved in kind of a weird, different play. But just feels like we're too often in that spot. Whereas like people who cover the Chiefs, usually the players that are in these spots that Andy Reid is setting up that are not maybe the household names, they're still usually pretty experienced players, or I don't know, a little better. I'd still take McCole Hardman over a lot of these tight ends, that type of thing.
Yeah, play calling. I think I've said this before on this podcast. It's the hardest thing for me to figure out how to evaluate, because I think a lot of what people call play calling is not play calling.
Yeah.
It's actually game planning. And I don't think I think the biggest problem, honestly, is that coaches don't tell us enough to learn about play calling. They won't let us in to let us know why we did that. So we can't like I can't tell you a bunch of calls Steichen's made that like give me a window into what he's thinking, because he doesn't explain them.
Yeah. And that's definitely made it hard with Shane. And so that's where like I think you have to lean more on the results, is that we can't really parse through it as well and say, well, this was what they were going for. These were the factors that kept it back. When we don't get a lot of information, we have to just look at the results. Last year, the results were really good. They were top 10 league in scoring with a backup quarterback and often a backup running back. So our conversations about Shane were very positive because, again, we're hedging on the results. This year, the offense has not done that when they've had more of the things they were planning on to work with. They've had a lot more of Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson, and it's not happened. So it's like, I don't know. It is a tricky thing to fully know, but at the end of the day, it's like everything else. It's a results-based business. So, at the end of the day, it's going to be his job. He's here to make the offense sing and to make the quarterback work, and we're going to see over time how that goes. It was great last year and step back this year, and they got to take another step forward.
It does feel like the way the season has gone has shortened the timeline on when they make that decision. Whether that's it's probably the end of next year, but it feels like the timeline is short. For the Colts Cover-2 podcast, this has been the First Impressions edition. I am Joel Erickson. This is Nate Atkins. I know it's going to be hard to get up for the rest of the season with these odds the way they are. I would say that the reason to watch is whether or not Richardson can take a step forward, even if you don't know the answer. That's the biggest reason, because that's their best shot.
Yeah. Honestly, I think it's the two pillars are Richardson and Steichen, and they both need to get better from here on. They've shown some flashes. They've taken a step back from what we hoped or thought they would be this year. It's not as fun as a playoff push, but the final 3 games, like those two they gotta take some strides. We want to go into the offseason feeling like you have some belief or positive momentum with those guys rather than maybe what we're feeling today.
Yep. We'll be back midweek. Who knows what we'll talk about? Maybe we'll talk about the Titans. No. We'll come up with something. We'll have something for you guys. Until then, have a good one. Try to get over this one. Not going to be easy.